introductions. In just a moment, I'm going to have you look around the room and stare at everybody, okay? Don't do it yet, but in just a moment, I'm going to have you do that. Now, if there are any single guys here, and you see a nice-looking young lady, this will be your God-sanctified moment to make eye contact. Ladies, same goes for you. We want equality, right? 1, 2, 3, go. Stare. Go. Look around the room and stare. Gentlemen, if you're looking at me, you're looking at the wrong place. All right. Question. What makes us equal? Are we all physically equal in this room this evening? We most assuredly are not. In fact, last year, at age 57, I did something my wife considered suicidal. I went back to the high school where I played as a shooting guard on the basketball team, and I played on the alumni team against the current student basketball team. Do not laugh, we beat them by 24 points. I'll tell you how you do that, by the way. It's called old man smarts. The young guys all want to be in the highlight film, right? So you plug the middle, force them to take outside shots they can't make, and then you slow the pace to molasses. And it also helped we had a few recent grads that supplied young legs. Yours truly took one shot that night. Just one. It was a three-pointer, nothing but net, baby. I dreamed it. And I had 3 assists and a rebound. Now you're thinking that's nothing. Can I tell you something? When you're 57, you have a single objective for that basketball game. Avoid hospitalization. And that's what I did. But if I had to go one-on-one against many of you in this room that I've met tonight, I would lose by a truckload. Why? Because physically, I can't match up to you anymore. Men and women, if Planned Parenthood is correct, that we can kill the unborn because they are physically not our match, they are not developed like we are, human equality becomes a myth. Because if it's development that gives us our value, and you have more of it than me, you have a greater right to life than I do. Human equality is out the door. Are we all equally self-aware right now? How many of you had coffee before coming to this dinner? Can I see your hands? By the way, coffee is proof that God has not utterly forsaken us. If you need coffee in the morning, I'm with you. I get it. If self-awareness is what gives us our value, the way Peter Singer would argue, the way that many who support abortion would argue, if you're not valuable because you're not self-aware, and you have more self-awareness than I do, then guess what? You have a greater right to life than I do. And once again, human equality is out the door. There's one thing we share equally. As you were staring around the room at everybody a moment ago, and you were giving them that eye, there's one thing we share equally. We all have the same human nature. And if you're a Christian or a Jew, you know that that human nature reflects the image of our Maker. We are born and we are made in the image of our Maker. That's the Christian view of society. And that view of human beings can explain human equality. We all have the same human nature. Now, what's a human nature? It's the thing that makes you human and not some other living thing. For example, your dog has a dog nature. Your goldfish has a goldfish nature. Cats, I have learned, have a satanic nature. That's right. In other words, living things have natures that determine the kind of thing they are. And if we are valuable because we have the same human nature, we can explain human equality. Because your human nature doesn't come in degrees the way that physical development does, the way that self-awareness does. You either have a human nature or you don't. And if you don't, you are a corpse. In other words, all humans have the same exact nature. And tonight I want to talk to you about why the question, who counts as one of us, is critical to where we are in the Western world today, both in Canada and in the U.S. And that topic is significant because everywhere we look, we see human dignity under assault. Here in Canada, euthanasia is being promoted legally and culturally, as you very well know. Provisionally here, you've had RU46 funded with your money, whether you like it or not. In my nation, you saw what happened in New York about 6 weeks ago. Right there on TV, you saw the Senate of New York rise and applaud a standing ovation for a bill that had just passed that allows babies that survive abortion techniques to be left unattended and die on the table. And we had, in my country, a state legislative body that stood up to applaud that. Everywhere we look, we see human dignity under assault. And we are part of a culture, men and women, that has no explanation for what makes us valuable and what makes us have dignity. There's no explanation for it. They don't have an answer for it. That's why you saw what you did in New York. That's why what we see culturally all around us, here in Canada, as well as in Western Europe. And the time for us as pro-lifers to step up and become apologists is now. And I have a very simple thesis for tonight. Every one of us in this room is now an apologist. Let me define what that is. An apologist is not someone who runs around and says he's sorry all the time. Husbands do that, but that's not what an apologist is. An apologist is someone who makes a case for what he or she believes. You make a case for what you believe. You don't just say you're pro-life. You don't just shout a conclusion. You actually give reasons for what you believe. You lay out a case. And by the way, there's biblical warrant for doing this. 1 Peter 3:15, we are told, if you are living in a culture that is hostile to you, your attitude as a believer, if you're a Christian, is to engage that culture by first sanctifying Christ as Lord, and then this piece of advice comes along. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. And if you think, men and women, we are any longer in the day where we can say, my church says pro-life is the way to go, that's going to do it. That's not even going to work with our own kids. Because I'll tell you what's happening to large numbers of Christian students in Western Europe, in Canada, and certainly in the U.S. They graduate from high school, go off to the university, and everything that they have been taught in your home to value comes under assault. And if they are not taught how to make a case for what they believe, their beliefs are going to be rendered useless. And that's what we see happening with students across both nations. An inability to defend what we believe. And I have some good news for you tonight, despite all that bad news I just gave you. To be a good apologist, to be one who lays out a case for what you believe, you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have a master's degree. You don't even have to have a university degree. You don't even have to have a high school degree. You just need to be clear on 3 questions. And I'm going to tell you what those 3 questions are in a moment, but I think my friend Greg Koppel has a great way of illustrating what your duty is and what my duty is. Our duty, men and women, in this Pentecostal culture that we're part of today, is not to expect we will always close the deal. That somehow we'll talk to people and they'll drop to their knees and say, I am so glad that God put you in my life to straighten out my twisted thinking so I could think correctly. That's not how it works. What your job is, says Greg, and he's right, your job isn't to worry about whether you close the deal. Your job is to put a pebble in their shoe. You ever been out hiking and had a pebble in your shoe? It's going to wear on you and wear on you until you stop to deal with it. And tonight I want to look at 3 questions that will help you put pebbles in the shoes of the people you are conversing with as you become an apologist who talks to fellow classmates or people you work with, co-workers, or neighbors as the weather warms up across the backyard wall. These 3 questions will help you be an effective apologist who puts that pebble in their shoe and gives them something to think about. Here are the 3 questions. Number 1, what is the unborn? And I'll explain why that's so critical. What is the unborn? Second question, what makes us valuable? What is it that actually gives us our dignity? And thirdly, what's our duty? What is the unborn? What makes humans valuable? And what is our duty? If you get those 3 questions clear in your mind, you can begin an effective lifetime of making a case for the pro-life view wherever God has placed you. It doesn't require expertise. Let's look at that first question. What is the unborn? How many of you ever read in school The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Can I see your hands? Okay, a large number of you. You may remember, even if it was a number of years ago, that there was a remarkable exchange that took place in that novel, principally in chapter 32, where Huck Finn has been out on one of his adventures. So here's this young boy, he's out playing around on one of his adventures, and he happens on the property of Aunt Sally. And Aunt Sally is a little bit deranged up here. She sees Huck Finn coming down the road, and she rushes out to meet him. And she says to him, "My boy, where have you been? Where have you been? I've been waiting for you. Why has it taken you so long to get here?" And Huck doesn't know what to do. He's not sure why this woman is after him this way. So he makes up a story. He looks at her and says, "Well, ma'am, I was on a steamboat. We were on a steamboat, and you know, it blew a cylinder head. That's why we're late." Aunt Sally said, "My gosh, was anybody hurt?" "No, ma'am. It killed a Negro, but nobody got hurt." "Well, that's good," said Aunt Sally, "because sometimes people do get hurt." What was just assumed about the black man? That it wasn't one of us? It wasn't argued for? It was simply assumed. The great Christian apologist C.S. Lewis said the most dangerous ideas in the culture today are not those put forth clearly by militant atheists. If Lewis were alive today, he would tell you that the biggest threat to Christianity isn't what Richard Dawkins is writing. It isn't what Sam Harris is writing. It isn't what Daniel Dennett or the late Christopher Hitchens wrote that's the biggest threat to us. The biggest threat, says Lewis, are those ideas that the people around us, where we work, where we go to school, simply assume to be true and see no reason to challenge them. And one of those ideas that's been assumed in our culture is that the unborn are not one of us. Let me give you an example. As you know, 2 years ago roughly, the Trudeau government gave new policy guidelines for the summer jobs program. And basically, if you were pro-life, you would have to sign on to an agreement that would invalidate what you do, essentially. And the Prime Minister justified that policy with the following statement. And I want you to listen to this statement that was aimed at pro-lifers and see if you can catch an assumption in it. Here's what he said, quote, "An organization that has the explicit purpose of restricting women's rights by removing rights to abortion and the right of women to control their own bodies is not in line with who we are as a society." Mr. Prime Minister, does, quote, "we," unquote, include the unborn? You see, he simply assumed the unborn weren't one of us. He didn't argue for it. When he talked about what's in line with us as a society, he didn't would be talking about today. And our job as pro-lifers is to flush that assumption out into the open where it can be dealt with. Now, here's a simple illustration that will help you visualize the need for this. I want you to imagine you are washing dishes one night at the kitchen sink, and it's after supper, and your 5-year-old son or grandson comes in behind you while you're scrubbing away with your back turned to the little guy, and he says to you the following: "Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this?" I see some of you giving me a puzzled look like, no, those cute little boys would never ask a question like that. May I enlighten you? This ring on my finger means I've been married to the most glorious woman in all of Christendom for 34 years. We have a son 29, a son 27, a son 22, and a daughter 18. Most assuredly, I have heard the question, "Daddy, can I kill this?" more times than I can count. Most often with his hands on his brother's throat when he's asking the question. What is going to be the first question out of your mouth when you hear that little voice say, "Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this?" What's the first question? What has he got? Cockroach, snail, have fun, do not show your mother. Neighbor kitty, hold it. Brother by the throat, get counseling now, right? You would never in a billion years say, "Sure, son, have at it," till you answered the predicate question, what has he got? You know what we just did, men and women? We just resolved the abortion debate. Can we kill the unborn? The answer is yes. If what? If the unborn are not human. But you gotta argue for that. You can't just assume it. I am vigorously pro-choice on women choosing their own healthcare providers, their own husbands, their own worldviews, the cars they want to drive, the pets they want to own, the careers they want to pursue, the wardrobes they want to purchase. I'm pro-choice on all of those things, but some choices are wrong. Like intentionally killing an innocent human being simply because he's in the way of something we want. That's a choice a civil society should not allow. But our culture, men and women, has decided they can go for that choice without ever doing the business of resolving that predicate question: what is the unborn? Nobody you know, I trust, would argue it's okay to kill 6-year-olds in the name of choice and who decides. You would consider that person a moral monster. But that same moral logic is used on the unborn. Why? Because the people we're living amongst assume the unborn are not human, like that 6-year-old. What is the unborn? I'm going to answer that question for you right now, and we're not going to go to Scripture. We're not going to go to the teaching magisterium of the church. We're not going to go to philosophy. We are going to the only place you should go to answer the question, what kind of living thing are we dealing with? And that is the science of embryology. If you go home from dinner tonight and you look across your back wall and there's a 4-legged critter running across the block wall, you don't pull the Bible up to figure out what it is. You consult biology. What kind of thing is that? Same thing here. What is the unborn? We've got to answer that question. And we're going to answer it from the science of embryology. And I'm going to give you that answer in a sentence. I'm going to summarize for you the findings of embryology textbooks worldwide. Here we go, in one sentence. From the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You were distinct in that you were not part of the mother. You had your own DNA, many times a different blood type, at least half the time a different gender. You were distinct from her. You were living because dead things don't grow. And you were a whole human being, meaning that though you had yet to grow and mature, the kind of thing you are was not under dispute. You were a distinct, living, and whole human being. Now I want everybody right now to hold your hand up like this. And I want you to begin pinching cells off the back of your hand. Go ahead, give yourself a good pinch. If your neighbor isn't doing it, grab skin cells off the back of his neck. Go ahead, give yourself a good pinch. All right, congratulations. You just sent at least 200 somatic cells hurtling to their deaths on the lap in front of you. And I have more bad news. It gets worse. Every one of those cells contains your entire DNA encoding. Did you just commit mass homicide? And of course the answer is no. And you know why it's no. These cells on the back of your hand are merely part of a larger human entity, you. They are not distinct whole human beings the way you were when you were an embryo, the way I was when I was an embryo. There's a difference in kind between each of our bodily cells and the embryonic human beings we once were. That's the science of embryology. Why do so many people not get this? I'll give you a reason. One reason. For some people, their sense of feeling, their sense of intuition just doesn't match up with that tiny, what appears to them to be a tiny ball of cells at the embryonic stage. They look at that and they say, I can't even see that embryo without a microscope. It's smaller than the size of a dot at the end of a sentence, and it just doesn't feel to me that that's the same as my cute little newborn cousin named Abigail. I just don't see those two being the same. And I think if we're honest, we probably can sympathize with that if we stop to think about it. But men and women, sometimes our intuitions are wrong. And I'll try to give an illustration here that will hopefully help us see that. For those of you in the room under the age of 45, you need to know that there was a time in history when we did not take pictures with our phones. We had these things called cameras. They were square, they had a shutter on them, the shutter would open, light would come in through the shutter, record the image on this stuff called film. And the way it would work is, you would shoot 36 exposures, and not a minute before, after you shot 36 exposures, or 24 exposures, depending on the size of the roll of film, you would carefully remove the film from the camera, hopefully in a room that wasn't too bright. You would put it in a little canister, you'd put a lid on it, you would then drive to the far corner of the neighborhood supermarket where there was a little yellow shack called Photomat. Now, I don't know if they had Photomats up here. They may have called them something else. But did you have little shacks where you would drop your pictures off? The way it would work in the States, you drop your pictures off, wait a month and a half for them to come back, half of them overexposed. That's how it was back then. Well, as many of you know, in the early 1960s, the Polaroid camera started making its appearance. And the Polaroid camera was interesting because many of you have them now, and you're thinking, boy, these are really cool looking cameras. They weren't cool looking back then. They looked like a monstrosity, but they had an advantage. You'd shoot your picture, it'd spit out the piece of paper, and you'd wait about 2 minutes and you'd shake it. A few of you are doing the muscle memory thing right now, I can see it. You'd shake it, and in about 2 minutes, your picture would emerge right in front of your eyes. I want you to pretend, to borrow an example from Richard Stiff, that it's 1970. You are on a Mexican safari. You have a Polaroid camera. You just shot a picture of a black jaguar leaping across the trail in front of us. And you are ecstatic because you know black jaguars are almost never filmed. You also know National Geographic is going to pay you big bucks for that pic. And while you're breathlessly waiting for that picture to emerge, I come up behind you, rip the camera out of your hands, and tear up your picture. Are you angry at me? Yes or no? You will kill me even if you are pro-life, right? Now, what if I said, what's the big deal? Why, I don't see a jaguar there. That was just a white piece of paper with a brown smudge on it. you would look at me with eyes on fire, and you would say, have you lost your mind? The jaguar in the picture was already there. We just couldn't see him yet because he was still developing. Men and women, from the one-cell stage, you were already there. We just couldn't see you because you were still developing. That's the science of embryology. That answers the assumption that the unborn aren't human. We have to know how to spell that out for people. But we've got to do something else. Science cannot tell us how to value something. Science tells you that what's coming to meet you at the front door is a cat and not a dog, but it doesn't tell you how you want to treat the cat or treat the dog. It also can't tell us how to treat fellow human beings. We have to now answer the second question: what makes us valuable? Here's the dividing line in the culture. It doesn't matter whether it's the US, Canada, Western Europe. Here's the dividing line. Either you believe each and every human being has an equal right to life, or you don't. You either believe each and every human being, regardless of their size, their skin color, their sex, their abilities, has an equal right to life, or you think they're only valuable because they can function at a certain level. That's the dividing line. And in the Western nations today, we have people telling us that we can set aside an entire class of human beings to be killed because they don't measure up to our arbitrary standards of who counts as one of us. And that is why the Western cultures can never get equality right. They don't have a basis for it. We do. We do. When you were looking around the room, you were looking at fellow image bearers. You were looking at people who had the same human nature you do. Not less of it, not more of it. You equally share that nature because it doesn't come in degrees. Now, of course, people will say, fine, I get it. We adults have a human nature. Of course we do, but not that embryo. And I have a question for those people. How is it possible for two human parents to create offspring that isn't human, but later becomes so? To quote the renowned philosopher Ricky Ricardo, they have some splaining to do at that point. How is that even possible? There's 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult that's here today. And one of the things we need to do as pro-lifers is stop assuming the burden of proof every time somebody brings up an objection. If I claim there's a pink elephant swinging from the exit sign over there, and a few of you are looking right now, that's the right thing to do. You don't have the burden of proof. I do. I'm the one making the claim. When Planned Parenthood says the unborn have no right to life because they're not developed, they need to explain why development matters in the first place. That's on them, not you. It's not on you to say, why, they have a beating heart within 5 weeks, they have brainwaves by 12 weeks. No. They're making the claim. Make them defend it. Of course there's differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult. But that's not the question. The question is, do those differences matter such that we can say you had no right to life back then, but you do now? And that's where these 4 differences come in. Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. Stephen Schwartz suggests the acronym SLED to remember those 4 differences. It's a helpful tool to remember them. Size, you were certainly smaller as an embryo. But since when does body size determine value? Men are generally larger than women. Do they deserve more rights than ladies because they tend to be larger? Shaquille O'Neal, the former basketball star with my beloved LA Lakers, before he committed treason and spent a year with the Boston Celtics, is a foot taller than everybody in this room. But is he more human and valuable because of it? Body size doesn't give you value. What about your level of development? You were less developed as an embryo than you are as an adult today. Do you know what my answer to that is? So? If you will pardon an American example, I'd like to give you one that illustrates why this line of reasoning is so vacuous. Abraham Lincoln, while President of the United States, used to argue with people who thought the Union should abandon the cause of the slave. And Lincoln's critics would say, that black man is different from us. And you know what Lincoln's answer was? So? And Lincoln replied, and I paraphrase, the question, sir, is not does the black man differ from us, but does he differ from us in ways that justify enslaving him? In other words, Lincoln put the burden of proof right back on his critics. And here is exactly what Lincoln said to his critics. I'll quote him almost word for word. Quote, you say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then? The fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man? Take care, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than their own. Oh, you say it's not skin color? It's a matter of intelligence? The black man you wrongly allege has inferior intellect to the light-skinned man? Take care again, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. You say it's not skin color, it's not intelligence, it's a matter of interest, the white man having it in his interest to enslave the dark man? Take care yet again, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet who can make it his interest to enslave you. End quote. Do you see what Lincoln just did? The force of principled reasoning showed that the very arguments used to disqualify that black man as one of us worked equally well to shut out whites. And I am unaware of arguments that work only for the unborn, but don't also shut out people outside the womb. Peter Singer, the ethicist at Princeton University, is appalling to read. Because if you read his book, Practical Ethics, he will tell you in there that no newborn should be considered a person until 30 days after birth, and disabled infants can be killed on the spot by the attending physician if the parents want that. And what's his argument for that? Here's what he says. Fetus is not self-aware. Newborn isn't self-aware. You can kill both. Now, his conclusion is horrific, but his logic is perfectly consistent. If you're going to say the unborn can be killed because they're not self-aware, well, guess who else isn't? It's going to apply to more people than you may care to apply it to. Size, level of development. What about environment? Where you are has no bearing on who you are. If you drove at least 70 kilometers to come to this dinner tonight, can I see your hands? 1, 2, okay, we got a few. If a journey of 70 kilometers did not change you from one kind of thing to another, how does a journey of a few centimeters down the birth canal suddenly transform you from non-human, non-valuable thing we can kill to valuable human being that we can't? And the answer is, if you weren't already human and valuable, you don't get there just by changing your address. And finally, degree of dependency. Sure, you depend on your mother for survival. So, how does it follow that because you depend on a human being, you can be intentionally killed? I live in a town called Noonan, Georgia. It's outside Atlanta. You've never heard of it. But as I explained to a few of you before this dinner got started, the town where I live in has perhaps been seen by some of you, because it's one of the prime filming locations for the wildly popular television show, The Walking Dead. And I don't know how many of you have seen this. Now, before you go to Netflix tonight and say, honey, let's have a little family viewing, beware. It's a zombie series. And it's very graphic and bloody, so be advised. But the hero of the show is Sheriff Rick Grimes. And in season 1, episode 1, he's in a gun battle with bad guys with his buddy Shane, his partner Shane, and Rick gets hit with gunfire. and he's in a coma for a month, and he's in the hospital. And while he's in the coma, the zombie apocalypse breaks out. And he is left alone in the hospital, and the zombie hordes come through and somehow miss him. And he wakes up a month later and has to figure out what happened to the world I once knew. What happened to my wife? What happened to my son? What happened to my world I once was part of? That's basically season 1 of The Walking Dead. Now, let's change that script. One doctor stays behind to care for Rick. Rick depends totally on him for survival. Would it be okay for that doctor to intentionally kill Rick because Rick depends totally on him for survival? Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, none of those are good reasons for saying we could kill you then as an embryo, but not now. I want to conclude with a third question, and it leads us to celebrate the organization we're here tonight to partner with. We've looked at the question, what is the unborn? A distinct, living, whole human being. We've looked at the question, what makes us valuable? What makes us valuable is our common human nature, not some function we perform, not some level of development we achieve. But what is our duty in light of those truths? And I'll tell you what our duty is. It is to love our unborn neighbor and his mother. One of the ways we love our unborn neighbor is we speak up and make a case for life when we have an opportunity. How many of you in the holidays, at perhaps Christmas, let's say, you have family members who gather around your table who do not share your beliefs? They either are non-Christian, they're non-pro-life. Do you have any family members that gather in the holidays around your table like I do? Any of you? Okay. I want you to pretend you have an Aunt Betty, and she is from Ottawa. And Aunt Betty does not hold your pro-life views. In fact, she thinks you're crazy. She thinks you're nuts for being pro-life. And she's trying to be polite. She's sitting there enjoying her holiday meal, but she's clearly becoming more and more agitated, thinking about the way you believe. And finally, she drops her fork and says, listen, I just got to ask you, why on earth would you be pro-life? Here is the answer you're going to give her in a minute or less. And I need someone to time me. Is there anybody here that's got a phone or a watch you can time me to see if I get this done? All right, you're on, sir. When I give you the go, you go ahead and time me. Here is what you're going to say to Aunt Betty. You ready? Go. Aunt Betty, I'm pro-life because it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And the science of embryology says, Aunt Betty, that from the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like these skin cells on the back of my hand. You were already a whole living member of the human family, even though you had yet to grow and mature. And you know what else, Aunt Betty? There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency do not tell us you had no right to life then, but you do now. How'd I do? 45 seconds, okay? I'm old, I may be slow on the basketball court, but that was rocking it. Now, some of you may have been thinking, man, I wish he had written that down for us because you were trying to take notes faster than Donald Trump can tweet. I get it. But I have good news for you. I'm going to pick on my own country. I have to, all right? We have a sled card here. We're going to auction it off tonight. The first person that writes a $100,000 check to Chilliwack Pro-Life is going to get this sled card where I summarize. No, I'm just kidding. We will have them on the table as you leave, and you are free to take one per family, where you can take home with you what I just summarized for Aunt Betty, and you will be ready the next time you are asked to make a defense for what you believe on this pro-life issue. But there's another thing we do. We love our unborn neighbor, and we also love his mother. There's a pregnancy center represented here tonight. And they work closely with this organization. Why is that ministry vital? Because a large number of abortions annually, men and women, are repeat abortions. Why are women having repeat abortions? Because the first abortion never got resolved. Pro-life Christians have an answer to that hurting man, that hurting woman. We have an answer that says there's a solution to your problem. For those of us who come from the Christian tradition, the reason we don't condemn men and women who participated in abortion is because we are very aware that we share something in common with that person who's participating in abortion. Because according to the parable of the Good Samaritan, none of us in this room have loved our unborn neighbor the way we ought. We haven't loved any neighbor the way we ought. Jesus tells the story of a man who is going down to Jerusalem. He gets beaten up by thieves and thugs. He's left to die. Two religious leaders pass by on the other side of the road. They don't love the man, though they may have felt pity. And Jesus, answering a lawyer who says, well, who is my neighbor, says, all right, I'll tell you what it means to be a good neighbor. And we get this parable. And Jesus highlights for us this. What does it mean to love your neighbor according to the law of God? Absolute, selfless devotion to a complete stranger. Absolute giving of your resources without end to care for that complete stranger. Going out of your way for as long as it takes to care for that complete stranger, who in the parable just happens to be your enemy. Remember, Jews hated Samaritans. How many of us love any neighbor that way? And the answer is none of us. And the only solution that we have is found in the gospel, where God provides a righteousness we don't have on our own. And he sends Jesus to bear the sin that we deserve to be penalized for. And Jesus bears that. And what post-abortion men and women need to hear is that there is an advocate who stood in their place condemned, bearing the judgment of God for their failure to love. All of us in this room need that advocate. That's the Christian gospel. And it's the only hope that can meet the need of that post-abortion man or woman. And we have that answer. We love our unborn neighbor by defending him. We love his mother and maybe the father who participated in that abortion by pointing them to someone who will redeem them, forgive them, and restore them. This is the message of hope that we bring as pro-lifers. 5 years ago, I was in London, and I had been speaking there. And you'll be happy to know that there's quite a pro-life movement beginning to emerge in the United Kingdom. We started in 2012 with 14 people attending our annual pro-life apologetics training. Last year's training, we were up to 108, and we're going to be even bigger next year. There's a real movement going on there. But 5 years ago, when we were just getting started, I had my youngest son, Michael, with me, and we had a day free in London. So I said, Michael, let's go to the Imperial War Museum. Because if you are a history buff, at the Imperial War Museum, they have a Spitfire hanging from the ceiling, the plane that saved the West in 1940. And when England was standing there alone, and it was England with some help from the Canadians, and that was it, that were standing against Hitler. The U.S. was nowhere to be seen at that point. And the Spitfire carried the day in the Battle of Britain. And while we were waiting to get into that museum, when I couldn't wait to show Michael all the artifacts from the Second World War, I noticed the staff began to put out pictures of the evacuees. If you've read the Chronicles of Narnia, can I see your hands? Or seen the movies? Why are the children in the country? Why are they in the country? Because Hitler intentionally targeted children in central London. He thought, if I kill the children, I'll break the spirit of the people. And Churchill said, let's get the kids out of here. And so they were put on trains at Waterloo, Charing Cross, Victoria, and the other stations throughout central London, and they were put out into the country. And many of those kids, you've seen the black and white photos, they're standing on their platforms, they have little numbers around their necks. Many of those children will never see their parents again. And I'm explaining this to Michael when I get a little tap on my shoulder. And I look, and here's this woman, I'm going to guess late 70s, early 80s. She points at one of the pictures and says, I was one of those children. I grabbed Michael by the lapels, I yanked him over, and we're going to listen to what she's about to tell us. She said, when I was 4, my parents put me on the train at Waterloo, and I never saw them again. Go on, as if I didn't know the answer. She said 11 nights after I got on the train, both my parents were killed in a horrific bombing raid on central London. A raid that would have killed me had I not been evacuated. I said, what happened to you? She got a big smile on her face. And she said, oh, I had a good life. The family that took me in, listen to her words, just stepped right up and adopted me. Now at that point, I'm ready to bawl. And Michael's ready to bawl because I got him by the neck. But know her words, men and women. They stepped up. If you saw the movie Dunkirk, you know what Great Britain faced in 1940. Hitler had all of Europe. The Brits barely got their expeditionary force off the beaches of Dunkirk. They were awaiting invasion. They were outmanned, outgunned. Supplies were in scarcity. And that family could have looked at that girl and said, we can't take a risk. We don't even know if our nation's going to survive. No, they stepped up and did their duty. And I know as we look around tonight at our respective nations, it's very easy to feel that it's hopeless. It's very easy to feel that there's nothing we can do, that it's all lost. And I'm here to tell you that surrender is not an option. And not only that, we are here tonight to celebrate an organization that's making a difference despite the dark days that we live in. On your tables, there are response cards, and if you would go ahead and secure one of those right now. They look like this, they're white. If you would go ahead and secure one of those, don't fill it out just yet. I'll have you do that in a moment. But if you would secure that card and also secure something to write with. So grab a pen and get ready. As soon as you have that response card, would you wave it at me so that I know that we've all got them? All right, very good. I'm going to ask you to do something tonight. We're here to celebrate the Chilliwack Pro-Life Society. And I'm going to ask you to do two things tonight. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to write a very big check. In other words, make a donation tonight that stings the pocketbook. The kind of donation where you look at your spouse tomorrow morning as you're waking up and you say, honey, we gave what last night? Why would I ask you to do this? Because none of the community work that is done by this organization can be done on the cheap. You aren't going to educate people. You aren't going to have the ability to reach out to communities that aren't typically willing to listen to us if you don't have people standing beside you and funding that outreach. And so tonight, I'm going to ask you to write a big check and make a donation to this organization. And then I'm going to ask you to do something else. I'm also going to ask you to not only make a big donation, but to commit to a monthly amount. Now you might be thinking, okay, wait a minute. Dude, you just told us to drain our bank account, now you want us to give monthly? Yeah, that's precisely what I want you to do. Why? Because the big donation you give tonight, some of you that are here tonight, you could do a $10,000 donation. You could do a $5,000, maybe $1,000. For others of you, it would be big if it were a couple hundred. I'm not here to tell you what that amount needs to be. That's you that needs to make that decision. What I am here to tell you is that big check you write tonight will fund the future vision and outreach for this organization and keep it going. The monthly gifts pay the expenses that are ongoing, keep the lights on, pay the rent, pay for literature, pay for advertising, social media campaigns, all of which take money to do. And so will you join me? I'm going to stand up here and make my donation while I ask you to do yours. And I probably should have looked at this to make sure you can do it. Can we use credit card? Where is? Yes, we can. So if you want to use plastic, like I'm going to do, to get frequent flyer miles, you go right ahead and do that. You can use your check, you can use credit card, but let's stand with this organization as they reach out to those that need to hear a pro-life message. Let's help them do it. Let's get behind it. So would you join me? Take your sheet. If you need to just huddle with your spouse and say, hey, what amount are we putting down here? You go ahead and do that. You'll have time to do it. And let's go ahead and stand with this fine organization and partner with them together, shall we? Again, if you want to use your credit cards, that's fine too. But do write neatly so we can read it. When you are done, if you would place your completed forms, and if you are writing a check, the check too in the envelopes that are on the center of your table there. There are envelopes provided for you. And leave them on the table for now until we